Welcome, welcome to another installment of the Goddess Keys, where we remember the codes that lead us back to who we've always been before the programs of the false matrix simulation. And this is a continuation of a series I've launched on deprogramming astrology. And this is an astrological freedom practice known as Spiral Astromancy. Spiral Astromancy is looking at your astrological blueprint that was given to you by the false matrix simulation, discerning this astrology template to find different ways that your original signal may have been suppressed in the linear astrological predictive patterns, and releasing your frequency so that you are able to fully embody yourself outside of all programs that you may have incarnated with. So this is all about getting you back to your original spiral. It's knowing that there's a lot of information within your birth chart, but a lot of that information has been utilized as tools for oppression. And so it's retrieving that information and kind of unlocking different aspects of your energetic field so that you become the field. Instead of you being the singular person that you've incarnated into the simulation as, you remember your true essence prior to your incarnation and you become the field. And this transcends traditional law of attraction practices, which always sees something that you are seeking to attract and bring into your field as being outside of yourself. This is embodying the knowledge and the information that you are the field, that you encompass whatever it is that you're quote unquote seeking to manifest. But a lot of times it's really difficult to become the field or to know you're the field if you're trapped in all of these different scripts as it relates to how you're supposed to show up in the simulation. And that is what the astrological chart is. It is a script. You're supposed to follow the script, and it's a lot of times really difficult to deviate from the script. And so Spiral Astromancy realizes this and basically helps you to outline the different grids that you might be caught up in according to your birth chart, as well as the different frequency fences that you might be caught up in according to your birth chart, which might make you feel a lot more confined, feel as though you're not able to fully embody who it is that you truly are. A lot of times we are clearing different gate systems, different fencing systems, which did a lot of work to contain our fields or to keep us feeling small or boxed in. But as we realize and embody this fact that we are the field, a lot of those fences and those grids dissipate. Spiral Astromancy helps you to do the path working to clear your field so that you can fully embody it. So today, just so you know, I'm not doing this series in any kind of linear fashion. I will eventually be touching on all 12 of the astrological houses. And basically what I'll be doing in each series is talking a little bit about the traditional aspects of the astrological houses, but then specifying the grids that they're attached to, as well as the frequency fences that they're attached to. And so if you have like a stellium in one of your houses, like 3 or more planets in a particular house, then you want to really pay attention to that house because it's going to show you different grids that you're a part of. Grids is it's a very confining architectural framework within the false matrix simulation. It keeps you boxed in. If you think about a grid, there's lots of squares, lots of linear lines, or lines in general within them. And it's to keep you feeling separate, to keep you feeling small, and keeps you out of your power. So we want to work on dissolving the grids. Same thing, dissolving the fences. Frequency fences are a smaller architecture of grids, which basically keeps you staying in your place. And if you don't stay in your place, then you'll a lot of times receive weird karmic blowback or things like that within the simulation. But a lot of times it's because you're rubbing it up against a frequency fence. Like you're remembering that you're the field, but the frequency fence is going to come in and get you back into shape. Okay, if that makes sense. So today we're going to start with the 10th house. One thing I'll say about the houses is one thing I've explored is as you go up in the houses, the more distortions you need to clear, which is kind of inverted, right? Because we're taught in the simulation that the further up you progress, the further up the ladder you climb, the more rewards you get. So a lot of times like the 10th house and the 11th house and the 9th house, those are considered to be more auspicious houses where you get a lot more accolades, you get a lot more praise, there's a lot more expansion, you're seen more as a leader, these kinds of things. However, that's an inversion a lot of times. A lot of times those houses or those dimensions are going to be full of a lot of the false light ascension programming, a lot of like the archangel sort of programming, a lot of the stuff that has been wrapped up as things that are supposed to help us feel more like ourselves or more spiritual, but a lot of times they're rife with things like guru programs and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of like spiritual harm that can happen within these higher houses. Okay, so we're going to talk about the 10th house today. So the 10th house is attached to lineage and bloodline grids. So in astrology, it is traditionally associated with public identity, legacy, status, career, and external achievement. But if we are looking at things behind the mirror and aligning more with our spiral, our innermost selves, we can actually see the 10th house as more of a grid zone. It's a site of lineage entrapment, ancestral performance pressure, and bloodline visibility contracts. So in the 10th house grid system, if we're looking at the 10th house as a grid as opposed to an astrological placement, it's going to see legacy as surveillance. So the 10th house is not just about career or visibility. It actually becomes a bloodline performance portal where ancestral, societal, and spiritual programs intersect. And what they do is they track your public value, your generational role, whether you're an heir or a rebel or, you're here to heal the bloodline, those kinds of things. Your compliance with family legacy expectations. So if you have a lot of placements within your 10th house, you may have felt a really large pressure to perform for your family. You're not just wanting to be successful in your career for your own individual achievements, but it's usually attached somehow to your legacy. A lot of times, if you have identified as a star seed and you've had a really stacked 10th house, you may have thought like, I am here to wake up the collective, and that's what my career is going to be. And it's also attached to my bloodline and making my ancestors proud of me, that sort of thing. So some of the things that the 10th house will train you to do is to really focus in on your public value. Some of the things that you might hear if you have a really stacked 10th house, whether this is an internal script that's playing or maybe friends or family, which tells you these things. You might hear things like, you must fulfill what your parents could not. So maybe you feel like you're holding the karma for your whole bloodline, or maybe you feel like you need to have a particular career, not because you actually want it, but because your family or your ancestors expect you to have this career. Your career choices are guided by ancestral obligation, not your true innermost desires. You might carry the burden of breaking the cycle publicly. You might publicly be a cycle breaker. You might be really big on breaking ancestral curses, that sort of thing. Now, some other things that happen with the 10th house grid is bloodline visibility contracts. So you need to be seen so the lineage can be redeemed. Your visibility is somehow a redemption ritual for you and your family line. You must become the face or the voice of generational pain in order to break the pattern. Your public expression might be tracked by ancestor spirits or bloodline egregores. Okay. Now, this is only intensified if you are the firstborn in your family. There are specific programs that are attached to people who are the firstborn, which makes a lot of these things solidify even more. So if you have a strong 10th house and you're the firstborn, like this is something that you might really be enmeshed in. These are some of the grids that you might really be enmeshed in. Okay. You also might feel oppressed by praise. Okay, there might be a way in which you getting praised is a form of surveillance. So there might be loops playing in your field like be exceptional or disappear. Like you got to do it big. You know, you can't just be average. You're more than the average. Okay, this is part of the 10th house program. Ancestral lines reward performance. Wealth or safety is contingent upon your external success. And then you might have this mission-based identity, like you came here to serve the collective, or you also might carry on the baggage of ancestors who maybe had some unresolved issues or unresolved dreams, okay? And all of these quote-unquote missions, they bypass who you truly are, like outside of the programs. A lot of folks who are attracted to this content, they may have been feeling as though they've been looping for maybe several years, these kinds of things, knowing that there's something really specific that they're here to express, but then getting caught up in lots of different ancestral expectations, right? Or societal expectations. Now, the 10th house grid will support a lot of times with keeping you on those loops because you're always looking to prove your worth or your validity to an external source, even if those are your ancestors. And a lot of times we can get gaslit into thinking like, oh, but we're serving our ancestors, so that's serving an aspect of ourself because we share a certain bloodline. But I think an important thing to note with the way the false matrix simulation works is that blood is a lot of times utilized as a leveraging tool, okay? Just look at all the stuff on like blood sacrifice and that sort of thing. There's something even deeper that goes into blood as it relates to tracking and surveillance. And so this is something that you kind of want to learn more about if you have a stacked 10th house and you want to be able to transcend your bloodline, okay? Your ancestry, your being does not stop at your blood. It can go way, 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 way deeper than that. And you will actually need to excavate deeper than that to break some of these really stubborn programs. A little bit more about the 10th house. The 10th house grid encodes career, legacy, and public identity as proof of worth, safety, and impact. And it often impersonates self-actualization while looping the soul through mirror-based success roles, resurrection contracts, and ancestral validation routes. So this is where we get into guru programming. You know, folks who have a stacked 10th and 11th house can get, and also 9th, they can get caught up in guru programs. Either they become the guru or they get caught in with different guru loops. Okay, so it's something you want to be really careful about. And gurus do just that, right? They impersonate self-actualization, but really it's self-actualization through them, not through something that's sourced from your specific innermost self. Okay, so this grid tracks you not by who you are, but what you produce, what you prove, what you preserve. So the 10th house is kind of has that Capricornian, Saturnian type energy, which is a lot about status and legacy. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the distortions that you'll find in the 10th house grid. And also, I'm going to go over some of these. I go in a lot more depth in my Spiral Astromancy readings, and I give you a PDF which goes through all the different grids, all the different frequency fences across all the house systems, and will support you with reading your own birth chart. And, you know, we do a reading, but it's also to just kind of support you with your own freedom-based practice of clearing these grids and these frequency fences from your field. So if you're interested in the full download with this, then definitely check out the link below. Okay, so some of the distortions of the 10th house grid include that your career is going to be tied to ancestral restoration or name-based legacy. Your success is going to be encoded as public impact, applause, or divine visibility. So your success is always dependent upon how you're viewed. It's never how you actually feel about your life. And you can see how that could really get hollow, right? You might have a good life on paper, quote unquote, but you don't feel good. Also, spiritual entrepreneurship masked as a savior role. So this is something where, you might want to have a career as a healer or a light worker, et cetera, but you may not have healed your own codependency because you're still running through these 10th house grids, right? Where your approval is always outside of yourself. And that can keep you on this weird codependent savior loop that you probably are trying to get out of. But if you get into this, I'm appointed to be a healer for the collective sort of thing, you can get caught up in that sort of sacrificial loop. Now, one thing I want to talk about is these resurrection programs. There are these things called resurrection grids. This is something I need to go into more depth about in another download. But what I will say is that there is this energy harvesting scheme of bringing people to the edge of death. And I don't just mean this physically. I mean this in a weird spiritual way, like bringing people to the edge of death and then having them rebirth themselves, like the phoenix rising from the ashes, right? Or if we think about how Jesus resurrected himself on the third day, that sort of thing. Or if we think about Inanna, how she goes into the underworld, right? And she goes through all these trials and she goes back through the underworld. These are just some examples of this resurrection grid program. And this is a huge energy harvesting thing that plays out within the simulation. You get people on the brink of the edge or the end, or, they build up and then everything comes tumbling down and then they need to rebuild again. And then everything comes tumbling down and then they need to rebuild again. And the program is, oh, I'll just rebuild stronger. I'll get better, but really what's happening is you're being pumped energetically, right? Because it's always like you're rising, you're falling, you're rising, you're falling, you're looping. Meanwhile, if you are working on aligning with or resonating with your specific spiral and descending into your spiral, it's a constant descent. It's a constant coiling. It's a constant reclamation and recognition of yourself before the simulation. If you're not in that rising and falling program, then you're collecting a lot more of your energetic field prior to all the programs, okay? And you actually become a force or a field to be reckoned with, okay? But if you're in a resurrection loop or grid, right? Like you're building up, you're breaking down, you're building up, you're breaking down. You're kind of just being like, if you can imagine a cow being milked kind of thing, that's that frequency of what you're in, okay? So this is why it's also important to get out of the light worker programs, because the light worker programs will always have you going up, 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 rising, even getting lighter. And that's another distortion, because as you get lighter, how are you going to hold your frequency if you're so busy being light all the time? Energy harvesting is a lot easier to happen for people who don't have density or who don't have mass. And I don't mean this physically, I mean this energetically. It could play out as physical. There are certain intuitives that will intentionally put on weight in order to channel in a more clear and direct way, so that there is like a physical aspect of adding density. But I'm talking about more energetically. The more you can densify your field, the more you're immovable to the programs of the false matrix simulation. But if you're so busy ascending and rising and then falling and then rising and then falling, you can see how you'll never make it there. You'll never get that density to really root your innermost self into the simulation. I guess the best way I can describe it is if you've ever seen a plant grow from concrete. Tupac had a pretty famous poem back in the day called The Rose That Grew from Concrete. And it's this idea of something being able to blossom in a particularly inhospitable environment, but being able to root and blossom anyway. I've never seen a rose grow from concrete, but I have seen some pretty resilient, beautiful flowers and plants grow from concrete. And it's pretty rare. It doesn't happen that often. But when it happens, you notice, because it looks stunning and it also looks really out of place. That's kind of the energy that you get into as you resonate with your organic spiral. It's not that you leave society, right, and become a hermit. If that's not what you want to do, you don't necessarily have to do that. But you do need to have a little bit of some extra resilience, a little bit of some extra rooting, and probability needs to be thrown out the window in order for you to thrive. Okay, so this is a very non-linear way of living within the simulation. You live outside of the grids. You know, if we think about a rose that grows from concrete or a plant that grows from concrete, the grids would say that the plant won't survive and won't even grow to fruition. But that plant is growing outside of the grid system and somehow, some way makes it. So that's that kind of frequency that we're tapping into with this. So now let's talk a little bit about the distortions of the 10th house grid. So some of the distortions include career tied to ancestral restoration or name-based legacy, success encoded as public impact, applause, or divine visibility, performance-based self-worth loops, okay, especially in healing and coaching, and then spiritual entrepreneurship masked as a savior role. Now, how does this block you from becoming the field? Well, it makes you constantly on this hamster wheel of proving your value through visibility. It tethers your worth to output as opposed to presence. It turns your offering into a contract rather than an emanation. And then it links your creative potential to economy as opposed to sovereignty. So some signs that this grid might be active is a constant pressure to be seen or launch or lead. Success being tied to visibility metrics or client validation. Offering creation feels like an energetic sacrifice. Pricing feels entangled with self-worth and karmic giving. So those are just some of the indications. So now let's go into some of the frequency fences that can appear within the 10th house grid. I'm going to give y'all 3 of them. So the first would be the ancestral career assignment grid. What this does is it roots your public life through inherited family expectations, surnames, or heirship contracts. And it also collapses your spiral into legacy mirrors and karmic loops. So you're never able to embody your innermost self because you're always trying to prove something to your bloodline. Another frequency fence that can show up is something called the mirror economy contract. And what this is it hooks your income and status to public approval and resonance with existing market norms. So you're never able to fully express because you're always trying to keep up with the Joneses, basically, right? So, there's a part of you that wants to show up in one certain way, but then there's another sort of expectation a lot of times, which is being perpetuated by the economy, which is telling you that you must show up as another way in order to earn your worth. And then it also forces your offerings to reflect collective identity scripts instead of your own spiral creation. Now, another frequency fence or grid that can show up with the 10th house is the savior role overlay. So what this does is it ties your visibility to sacrifice, being the healer, the messenger, the martyr, or the teacher of the masses. And it also roots your work through exhaustion, codependency, or legacy service contracts, okay? So there are more frequency fences, but I'm just going to highlight those 3 for now. Just to summarize, the 10th house grid is very much tied to bloodline expectation, bloodline surveillance, doing things on behalf of legacy. And a lot of times, if you divert from what the 10th house grid says you need to be doing, then you will feel penalized, okay? You will feel as though you've done something wrong. And a lot of times, this is literally playing out in your field through different ancestral programs. Not all ancestors are, number one, organic or authentic within our field. There's a lot of weird projections and cloning stuff that's been going on in the simulation. And a lot of times there's a weird intergalactic element to some of these ancestral expectations, like the ancestor sort of surveillance technology can be tied to galactic contracts as well, keeping you on a certain script to be the light worker, to be the star seed. Meanwhile, your energy is being harvested through resurrection grids. And so you're never able to like fully resonate with your innermost self outside of the simulation, and you're just looping. Okay. So a lot of times ancestors or ancestral programs are used to do that. But what we want to do is we want to connect with ancestry outside of the grid system. So we need to transcend the bloodline in order to do that and go a lot deeper. So this is kind of where I'm going to end. I'm going to put this in a playlist called Deprogramming Astrology. If you're interested in learning more about Spiral Astromancy and getting into Spiral Astromancy reading, you can check out the information below. And then also you can connect with me on my website and check out a new offering I'm doing called Uncoached, which is really getting folks out of a lot of the coaching loops, which a lot of times is connected to different mirror-based validation. As much as I've learned from being a coach, one thing is you get to a point where you need to take off the mask, okay? Especially if you are transcending the mirror of the simulation. You know, if you want to thrive within the mirror of the simulation, yeah, get a coach. You can get a great coach and they will support you with doing that, okay? But if you're transcending the mirror, then you also need to transcend coaching, okay? And so I've gotten to a point, I've worked with a lot of different folks and have had really meaningful learning experiences and very enriching experiences in those journeys. But I am now at a point where I'm transcending the mirror. And so I also needed to transcend the identity of being a coach. Okay, so I put that mask down. I'm no longer a coach. I'm more of a frequency steward. And I go into more information about my uncoached offering on my website. So I'll leave the link below, and for folks that it resonates with, you'll basically know. It's a very specific offering. It's a lot of times it's going to be for people who've done the coaching thing and they're over it. They're over the coaching thing. They realize that it's connected to guru programs, and at the same time they are seeking some kind of stewardship, but in a different way. This is the only offering that I'm doing one-on-one outside of Black Diamond on Patreon. So if that's something that you're interested in, if you're looking to transcend the mirror, then this might be something for you. So I'll leave the links below for that. Sending you lots of love and joy until we meet again.